So Ginni, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks.
It's a real honor to have you here, and as you know, there's a slight interest in tech here at Stanford, so a particular honor to have one of the most powerful executives in the industry. But if I may, I'd like to pull you back to the beginning of your career. You started off in the automobile industry. What prompted the move to tech?
Well, I listened to as John was describing that. He said how many years, right? Are you all looking at me thinking I look older or younger? And we were just outside talking about this. You've had Mary Barra here too, right? So, because I started actually at General Motors, and so why did I move? I have to tell you something, and it's kind of an interesting story. General Motors had at the time, back when I went to university, and I went to Northwestern, and I was putting myself through school. And back in those days, GM offered me a scholarship, no strings attached. Nobody does that anymore, but no strings attached. Help me with school if I would just work in the summers. And I felt a great obligation then to try. And so, but what I always say to people, what I learned at what I thought was a really young age at the time, is that I learned the importance of passion about what you did. And it isn't, and I say to Mary, you love cars. You know, I like helping you, but I wasn't in love. In fact, I was working on trucks and buses, okay? And I'm like, I wasn't in love. And it taught me something, and I probably didn't crystallize it till later in life, that it was the importance of being passionate about what you do. And I guess that's so easy to say, especially for everybody here you're doing something now you like or you will do. But boy, life is too short. And so you've got to keep moving till you find what that is. And I'm not even sure I knew what it was at the time. I could only see what it wasn't. And so that was what made me move. And so because I said I love technology, because I was an engineer, I loved it, but I wanted to apply it to do things. And that's what led me then back to it. And actually, it wasn't much. I wish I could tell you it was a really complex job search. I had had a lot of job offers, but at the time I was getting married, and my husband was from the Midwest. And so I know for all the job offers I had on the West Coast, they couldn't understand why was I not leaving the cold, the snow of Chicago, until I finally admitted I was getting married, and I was moving over here. And I ended up there for, as I thought a lot about it, I said, where could I go that I could use technology in any industry? And that's what led me to IBM. So passion was my first lesson at a really young age to learn.
Well, passion clearly worked. You're now the CEO of one of the most iconic companies in the world. To those of us sitting in these seats, it can occasionally be daunting to think about the journey to being CEO. Can you tell us whether you were ever intentional about taking that job and what the challenges might have been along the way?
Well, let me do a poll. So this is somewhat interactive, all right? So how many people think they want to be CEO of anything? Okay, so half. How many are not sure? The other half, yeah, okay, or the other third, right, so to speak. Because I was talking to Jordy about this. I said, you know what, there was never a goal. It was never, ever a goal for me. And I think there's a lesson in that, because I think there's been a lot of people who've always said, this has got to be a mission. You've got to want to do this. You know, people who want this job, stake it out and go for it. And I don't prescribe to that school. I prescribe to the school that you just keep doing what it is you love to do. You do it great. It opens a door. You do something else. And that sort of led to this place, right? So I can't say I ever started that way. I know people want me to say that, but I can't say that it was really that way. But I think the other thing, if I can, not that if you have it as a question or not, but the other thing what you made me think of, though, is, again, if I can share something of value on this, I do think people often say to me, and John, when you introduced me, you said I'd been at IBM. Now it's 37 years. And that may seem like a long, well, it's obviously double most of your ages or something. So, so why did I stay, right? People will say, why did you stay? And in addition to being passionate, I feel really strongly, whatever you go do something with purpose. You can define what that means, but do something with purpose. And I always felt, to this day in different ways, and I'll come back to maybe even now as CEO, but is that IBM had a purpose in this world, and that this world would be different if it wasn't for IBM. And it doesn't mean everything we do is that way, and there'll be clearly things other great companies and you'll go off and do, but but there are so many things I can point back in time and forward to and say wouldn't have existed without. And that's this idea of purpose. And so I started, you said, or John says, an engineer, but I've done engineering, I've done sales, I've done research, I've done finance. I feel like I've had 100 careers. I did a consulting company, I did a technical company, all within one place. So that ability to work from anything you can dream of, and then in those wildest moments, it has purpose, And I was thinking the other day, a client I had met about 7 years ago. We had started some work together. You mentioned Watson, and we started in healthcare. Healthcare is one of the most difficult, and who's in healthcare? Who wants to be in healthcare in some way related? It is obviously one of the most important things to change. It is one of the most difficult things to change, and it varies around the world and what the systems are. But anyways, I've always said for IBM, it was going to be one of our moonshots. Moonshots meaning I know how hard it is to change. I mean, it's so obvious, the problems. So if it's so obvious, why can't it get changed? And so there are many, many reasons. And anyways, we started on this, and I only tell you this story, back to purpose, I will always remember going down the street in New York one day. I was with my husband, and she called my name out, and I turned around, and it was a client. We were working on the beginnings of Watson in healthcare. And I can always remember she grabbed my shoulder and she said, we will change the face of healthcare. My little part. I'm under no illusions that I will change, my little part. To me, those are the moments you live for. And so that is why I stayed. Did you ask me that question, though? I felt like telling you that story. I don't know why.
My question was somewhere in there.
I somehow felt it was important based on, I don't know what, but go ahead. All right. I don't always tell it, so that was a...
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a more interesting answer than my question was.
Okay,
so
okay.
It works.
Why do you stay here?
Sorry?
No.
This is not interactive. We're cutting that off.
But I looked. You've had lots of different jobs already.
I've had 3 or 4
Several
jobs.
experiences, right?
Yeah, several experiences. None of them with any purpose, which is why I'm here. So
yeah,
that's a little easier.
Now, do you believe about purpose, though? Doing something with purpose, or just more? I'm just curious.
I do now.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I am serious. Does it seem important now, or maybe later?
I think it always seems important. I think purpose is something that I think a lot of people here think about a lot, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of people come to business school.
I mean, it isn't the only reason. Don't make it. I don't mean it to be as an altruistic point, because I think you can do multiple. You have commercial value and purpose at the same time, right? And you can learn and have purpose at the same time. And I think those are those companies that offer that wonderful combination. And it isn't as if it's like all you have to do every moment of every day, right? So that's all. I think you will find many opportunities to do both.
So throughout your career, when you were faced with choices, other companies trying to lure you away for greater personal commercial value, was it always that purpose you found at IBM that kept you?
I think, this purpose is, if I can, this purpose point I think is an important point right now in this moment in time. Jordy and I were talking about, before I got out here, I just came back from, it feels like it was a long time ago, but I think it was last week, the World Economic Forum. And this year, I co-chaired it, and I co-chaired it with 6 other women. So highly unusual, and if you think about it, that decision was made a year ago, actually, to have this be women to co-chair it. But I thought hard about, did I want to do it and why? And it's going to be related to the question you just asked me. So you said purpose. I actually think this is a really interesting moment in time for technology. Actually, for business in total. I feel like this is this wonderful. We have this opportunity to solve so many problems, many you work on, but with them come a set of challenges that are greater than have ever been in time before. And so the reason I had agreed to do WEF was this idea about responsible stewardship. Now, maybe there's a better word, but I feel tech ourselves, as well as even most companies, this idea that what is responsible stewardship? Because there is no doubt these technologies, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about it, they're going to impact everybody. They're going to impact everybody's job, and they're going to happen faster than other series have happened before. And we have this, I think, a real issue of creating a world of have and have-nots out there, and whether it's businesses, whether it's people, individuals, and that there is this idea that you've got to responsibly bring these technologies into the world. So when you say to me what also keeps me there, it is that belief. And I think this is really this moment, and maybe we'll talk more about it, but this ability to usher them in with transparency, with purpose, that word again, to also live by a set of data principles so the whole world doesn't end up with all value in a few hands. I think that's wrong. And a third is then a real obligation of business and government and society to prepare people to live in this world. I always think it's like, transforming a company. You can see where you are and where you want to go. You get killed in the transition. And it's always this transition that makes the difference. And so why do I say? I believe really strongly that we understand that stewardship, that it is not enough to make things. You have to bring them safely into the world or your job is not done.
There's a lot
you can take your notes back out. Sorry, I agree.
No, there's a lot to unpack in there, and I think that one of the interesting points is in a practical sense, how do you balance your responsibility to your shareholders, your need as a company to drive sort of real technological leadership with that stewardship to society? I mean, how do you do that on a day-to-day level?
What do you think? And seriously, and you must think of this in classes, right? What do you think about for that?
I honestly have no idea.
Okay. I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm not putting you on, because I think you actually probably know the answer to that, to be honest with you. So to me, the answer has always been, and maybe it's because of you talked about our past and all. First off, if you don't define yourself as a product, if you don't protect your past, and then if you try to do the right thing for the long term, I think you end up in the right place if you do those three things. And so, so to me, that balance, I always feel like many of us, and again, some of you in the places you go, we are allowed to operate because our clients and society allow us to operate. And that is built on trust. And so, in the end, society or business will decide if they trust you. And so, always with that in my mind. I mean, I go back in time, things like, and not a credit to any of my decisions by any stretch, this goes back decades, when governments had asked us in many countries, we were talking about, today IBM's in 170 countries. 35% of our business is from the United States. So we've got quite a lot of experience everywhere else. How many times governments had asked us for access to technology, backdoors into technology, and we're the only tech that can say we said no from the beginning of time, because our license to operate was based on trust. And so I think this idea, if that's the role you feel you play and you make that decision for the long term and that trust will matter, you will actually make those right decisions. And I think it's true for consumer companies. I don't think it's true for just, we're B2B, but I think it's true for everybody.
There's a lot of rising mistrust in technology companies these days, I think, and you've seen a lot of tech leaders go to Washington publicly apologizing. How do you think the tech industry as a whole needs to rebrand itself or reevaluate its image? Is it all part of this communication? Is it being demonstrative? How does that work?
I was going to ask you what you think, but I won't do that. Okay, so let's...
Next week it'll just be me up here. I'll take questions from everybody, and seems like that'll work better.
You're doing good. You're well prepared, and so that's, in fairness. So let's just talk a little bit about that, right? Let me just pack it in small. I really believe this is a moment in time for all of us, and I say this to all my clients, right? This is our moment for this kind of stewardship. Really principled stewardship, about how to bring all this technology in. So I think when you do that, you recognize what you are and what you're not, or what you've become. And so, as an example, we'll probably talk a little bit about AI. And in AI, as an example, is one of the many technologies, but I feel this way about others too. When I say, what do you have to do to build trust? Well, you have to bring it into the world and be clear about its purpose, its transparency, and its explainability. So purpose meaning, tell people this is to augment what man does. Honestly, I was an AI specialist like 30 years ago. I wish it had been called augmented intelligence. I've been saying this for a decade, because I do really see that we'll solve so many great problems, but this will be a world of man and machine. And so they're going to have to work together, and that is going to mean a lot of change. And so If you are clear that your purpose, though, is to work with, not to replace, and I'm not Pollyanna, there are things that will be replaced, but then you'll help people do their job even better. And I see this I can give you tons of examples of it. So purpose, then transparency. I think I need to tell you when I'm using these technologies. And then I need to tell you how they were trained. I need to tell you what data got used. I need to tell you where it came from. It's one thing if you're asking simple questions about weather, and we own the weather company, so that's okay. No problem. You assume how weather got there, or the favorite song. But when you're asking about healthcare, you're asking about a regulation, you're asking about the right treatment for cancer, you care who trained it. And so then the other thing I tell you we've learned over the mistakes we have made is you then have to be able to explain your answers. Because if I'm a professional using AI, do I want a black box? How many of you would like to work with a black box? Gives you an answer. You don't. You want something to say, this is why, this is the background, this is how it came up. And it took us down different paths of how to build this kind of technology, because you have to be able to explain it. So to me, when you said, how do you build that trust in this moment? I don't think it's about just words. I think it is about real actions. You be clear on your purpose, you be clear on transparency, you be clear on explainability. And then you have to live by things like, you own your data, I don't own your data. Data can freely flow, governments can't have access, here's how I secure it. And then you help with skills. So I know that's a lot, but I honestly think that's what we gotta do at this moment in time, that it's such a special moment to get this off on the right foot. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense to
I
me.
could ask everyone, but you're right next to me.
It does make some sense to me. And I guess one of the fears I might have as someone learning a very traditional set of skills at business school is how am I going to augment what I do with AI? Is this something that you think is really going to be truly practical in every industry, that we're all going to be able to do this, or are we going to be replaced by the machines?
You don't. I hope nobody. How many people believe you're replaced by machines? Seriously. I mean, the way I asked it, doesn't make you want to answer my question, but...
Two brave souls right
yeah,
at the back.
I know, and they're counting on that I cannot see that far at this point. So, we just finished another study. There have been many studies. I read 3 more on my way out. Thursday, I'm going to be at a big group of my colleagues on this topic about the future of work. And they're all over the board, right? But I believe a couple things, and then I'll answer your question about that. So first off, if you guys study technology better than most in the world, what's different about, I think, the moment we're in right now is that it has a chance to have an exponential impact, not linear. Most of the time when things change, it's linear. Improvement, goes like this, line through it. If you go back in time, Moore's law with processors doubled every 18 months, that would be more exponential. If you would go back then in time, the social media networking, where it later became known as Metcalfe's law, that the value would be the square of the nodes in a network, so you have the network effect. So everybody talks endlessly about the amount of data. It's not the amount. It's if you could really get learning to happen exponentially off of that data, you would have another exponential curve caused by learning. That's what I think is in front of us. So if that's true, this third kind of big exponential curve in life, then you'd say, does it replace everything? I don't think it replaces everything. It does change everything. So we've done all these studies. It could be 5% of jobs, 10%. I don't think it matters. I think it's 100% change. So you prepare for that world. And I was so 2 ends of a spectrum. One of the very earliest things we did was healthcare and started in oncology. Extremely difficult. And it's been an interesting road and an interesting learning. So first off, time does matter with some of these technologies to get started. So you may think of Watson for Jeopardy, but much has transpired since that time. In fact, November, December, The Oncologist, which is the most trusted sort of peer-reviewed journal of oncology, put out a study on Watson, 1,000 patients, tumor board, and we were able to find 30% more, in 30% of the cases, new things that should have been followed than what a doctor could find. That's not an insult to doctors, but there's a learning here, right? Because how many professionals ever want to be told they missed something or they got something wrong? It's very difficult. And so there's a whole change management side to what's going to really happen here. But I then take that same situation, and we're now up to 100,000 patients in oncology treatment in India and China. See, because there's only one oncologist for 1,600 patients. Here, there's one for 100. It's a very different world. And so that sort of idea that motherhood's, how does that saying go? Necessity is the motherhood of invention. Have you ever, it's going to leapfrog, I think, and driven by perhaps other parts of the world for different reasons, less specialization. So there, the doctors are learning and saying, oh my God, I can't do this job by myself. I mean, it's impossible for almost any professional, right, to do this. So I learned this lesson with that, and the technologies continued to learn faster and faster. I remember the very first cancers took 9 to 12 months to teach. Now 30 days, a new cancer, 30 days, a new cancer. So this idea, will your job change? I think everybody's will, and professionals at one end of a spectrum, and then I said there's another end of a spectrum. Just to give you a feel for why I say this, my own HR, I actually think, most people, anybody want to be an HR professional? One, okay, see, there we go. Now, it is, most people would, A, it's a difficult job, B, there's a lot of administration that people think typically associated with it. I've got a fantastic leader who has spent 4 years, I think, making it the most AI cognitive profession in the world. Now, it's changed everybody's job, but it has got everything to do with how recruitment is done, proactive retention, compensation so there's no bias in it, as an example. Everything to do with not only answering your questions, helping your career, what should you learn? And that is applied everywhere along the way. And that to me is like a really normal, good example of how life changes for all of those jobs. And they all changed. It does make a difference in that you have people with less training and skill able to do jobs, and it puts a premium on being an expert on the other side, because things go very quick from beginning to expert. You skip right over those. That's the kind of world I think we'll be in.
Definitely. And to go kind of away from AI, but still the future of work, something that really struck me as I was researching for this interview was IBM's Pathways to Technology Schools. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and the mission and how you think future high schoolers will go through their education.
Well, how many people think that kids coming out of school have the right skills to be successful? Broadly speaking, not your neighbors. Okay, was the neighbor part that stopped you, or the you're like, oh, my neighbor's kids, forget it. This is be something I would like to either get some opinion. We're gonna have some lunch afterwards, some input from folks. This started with, I believe, back to this point with this moment of technology changing everything, that the skills issue is a really big issue around the world, and I don't look at it just in a zip code and in a state. In one place in this country. I believe it's what's given rise to all of the political upheaval we've seen. There are people that don't view they have a better future in front of them. There is a world of have and have not, and that to me is a very dangerous place to go for any economy. And so I think the route, when you track back on all of this, is skills. And so Jordy asked me about this thing called Pathway to Technology that we started. So this is a wonderful university, but I don't believe in the whole globe you can say to people, you only have a future if you have a STEM degree or you have a university degree. I believe strongly in those. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't believe in those. But for the billions of people on this earth, that is not going to be the future. And so how do you therefore, back to man and machine, and how can people have a really productive future, make a good income, and have skills relevant? And so I think there'll be 3 things you have to do. One of them is, for the youth coming through, we came up with this idea called Pathway to Technologies. There's 100,000 kids in these schools now. So you may say 100,000 is a drop in the bucket for billions of people on the earth, but it's not, it's a reasonable start, 100,000. And it was the idea, could you take a high school, everybody, and we're now in 6 countries. Take a high school, and some countries would call it different things, but a community college nearby. Think of it as a 6-year high school. And could you come out with skills that would be employable in a tech world? And we've proven that it's pretty true. Double the median income, and we picked the worst kids in the worst schools everywhere in the world that we could find to start with. We did not cherry pick anything. And it is heartwarming. I mean, every parent wants for their child a better future. I don't care where you are from or what country you are from. And every kid, if given the opportunity, so A, we help them with curriculum, B, we give them mentors, and C, if we have jobs, we give them a chance. And I got 300 other companies like ours to go in on this. Everybody everybody's happy to mentor a kid. I've never met someone who wouldn't do it yet. And this idea, I think, is becoming a bit viral. I'm going to do all the governors of this country, well, I guess it's February, this month already, get every state going. So there's about 10 states that it's already going kind of viral in. And I think this is going to be something that back to like social responsibility, every company can do something here. Every company, it's going to have to be a public-private partnership to address the skills issue in this planet. And many of my colleagues have different ways or something like it, but it will take that. And then there'll be the section of retraining, which is also one of the hardest. Again, back to this dislocation here. So whether we do a lot of retraining and others do, and then I think it leads to something else, which is going to be society and governments coming up with ways that say, you know what, this idea that you like go to school till university and you're done, this is not going to work out so well. We're going to have to do something with lifelong learning, and those of you that look at social systems, that do some encouragement that people continually go back and do that. So what do you think of that idea?
Pretty cool. Pretty cool?
Okay. It's heartwarming. I mean, the only thing I did not count on is that some of these kids, this has really been an interesting thing for me. The kids, they are kids, so it's okay to call them kids. You give them this chance, so 6 years, which by the way, you guys would never know this. The typical community college in this country, it takes 7 years to graduate from a 2-year school. And even at that, like 7% of kids do it. I mean, it's ridiculous. And partly it's because the curriculum, they don't teach anything employable. And that's how they're funded. So we've been working with the government to get them to change that, to say, you can't just give schools funding. They gotta teach an employable skill, and that's not just a vocation. So, but the funny story I'm gonna tell you is what we had learned. So to get going, we've got kids graduating in 4 years with an associate degree, 3 years also with an associate degree. So when we offered them jobs, back to my HR, they came back to like, hey, you realize these kids are not like 18 yet? I'm like, oh, that's a problem, isn't it? So they're like, we gotta like pay for their mother to come with them too, you know? And so they gotta live somewhere. So for their internships. But anyways, we've managed through all that. And to me, it's very heartwarming. I mean, and many of them, by the way, go on to 4-year universities that never, ever, ever would have anyways. So it's both ways, right? Because I don't want you to say I'm not, it's to me about giving people a chance, right?
That really is heartwarming, and these initiatives are fascinating. But I would like to change tack slightly to talk a bit more about IBM. It's a company, as the Dean said, that's transformed itself several times. You're taking it through another transition right now. I think we'd all be interested to know a little bit more about what transformational leadership means to you and how it's become so deeply embedded within IBM's DNA.
Yeah. So IBM, 107 years old, right? Only tech still here through generation after generation, only one. And maybe it's because we've had a few near-death experiences that teaches you forever to be humble and forever to realize you have to reinvent yourself. And so, as I said when I started, like my learnings from my predecessors, don't protect your past, don't define yourself as a product. And then do the right thing for the long term, no matter how strong the short-term winds are in your face, which is what we have done. John, you mentioned we're 46% new products and services in the last several years. So in a word, what we reinvented IBM around, maybe I can convince some of you to come work for us. I'll hold that as my grade of whether I did a good job today or not, maybe. In a word, it was the word data. You're probably not surprised at that, right? It was, and honest, I had sort of come up with this, and I thought it was corny at the time, a decade ago, a saying that said, data would be the world's next natural resource. Because I thought the analogy was really good, that like oil, there are very poor countries with oil. So you can have a lot of data, doesn't mean you get any wealth from it or any value from it. But those who did, and the technologies were happening, could make a difference. You marry that with, we had done all this work on, just forget the background, a $2 trillion market to make better decisions. Unlike what we all probably think, we all don't make great decisions all of the time. So better make in any profession that would be out there. And so that's what we started and set out to do, and that is what has been really at the root of this. So it meant having to transition to the cloud, transition to big data, transition to AI. But I would be the first to tell you guys, we do it in a business context, and there is a difference. And so Just like when I think about artificial intelligence for consumers versus for professionals, I see a very strong difference. As an example, what we've had to build for is things like it has to learn domain data. So you have to learn regulatory environments. I talked about medicine. You have to learn HR. And that means you have to learn off of very small amounts of data. That's a different kind of AI. You don't have billions of records to look at. You might feel like there's billions of regulations, but they're not. I mean, so you have to learn off of very small amounts. That's point one. Second part, we felt like, you know what? 80% of the data is not searchable in the world. It belongs to our clients. I better protect it for them. And I better not just protect the data, I gotta build this in a way that the insights, because that's actually what's more valuable, stays with them and doesn't train something for the competitor. That is a very different kind of AI. That's not an AI that came from a search engine. So because I've got to protect those insights and I'll come back to why that is meaningful. It also means in this kind of world, you would have to be able to explain, like I was talking about earlier. You have to be able to explain where the answers came from. In consumer, not so much required, but definitely required when it's a professional that you're dealing with. So those are some of the differences. And so we've been remaking both our AI, all of our cloud systems, all of our expertise, and then you got to put it in workflow, because this, again, was my biggest learning. I'm telling you, the technology alone in a business environment does not matter. You have got to be able to change and reimagine the process of work. So we had to build all those capabilities in there, and always underpinned by security. And then this won't be the end. I mean, blockchain, quantum are all things we've been heavily, heavily invested in. And if I can humbly say, I believe in quantum. I know I'm out in I know where I'm at. I do know where I am, but I believe we're number one, and blockchain even too, for business reasons. Blockchain, I didn't say Bitcoin. And so I know you had Jamie out here. I've had endless discussions with him on that. So today, that's what IBM is. I mean, it is, we've always lived uniquely at this innovative technology, industry expertise, trust and security intersection, always reinvented for this next moment. And so again, I'm gonna be with my colleagues in another day. I am very optimistic. I know many of you want to do startups, and you will do and do great things. I'm equally optimistic about current companies that are out there, because as I say to all of them, I feel like this is the moment for the incumbent disruptor. And why do I feel this? This is the moment for the incumbent disruptor. If you believe it's a future differentiated by data and knowledge, and you own 80% of it, if you can do something with it, this is your moment now to take it. And as I've said, it just may be better to have had a past than not to have had a past. And so I see this in their actions in many companies right now. You see it in Walmart coming back. You see it, and this is now their moment. They've actually got something that, if they're able to harness it and do something with it, can differentiate them. And they build a platform on their expertise. And so I think it really, those of you that work on business models, it is a time of soul searching for lots of companies on what's their business model. They're saying to themselves, you know, am I a car rental company, or, you know, actually what I know how to do is fleet management. I'm moving cars around all the time. And in the world of autonomous cars, fleet management might be a pretty good thing to know how to do. So, I mean, I think everybody's going through that about what it is they can do with all that data and what their knowledge is. And so that's what IBM has become. It's the platform for that.
And you brought it up, so I'll ask. There are lots of students here considering offers from Google and Facebook and the likes. Where should they go to IBM instead?
Have I convinced you yet?
I'm hesitating.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay, let me ask you more questions, okay? I won't test. So, look, I think it goes back to where you and I started. I mean, we'll do some Q&A here. I would come to IBM for 3 reasons. A, you got to be passionate about the impact technology can have in the world. B, you got to want to change the way the world works. I mean, we do work on serious stuff that changes the way the world works. It doesn't mean we work on everything, so other people will do other pieces. But there isn't a bank that we don't run and help reinvent. There is not a credit card transaction. There's not a railroad car that runs. And these are serious obligations about how that happens safely and how it then at the same time reinvents itself. So this idea that to help change some of what, not everything, but to change part of how the world works is more, let's just say, It is certainly what we aspire to every day, okay? I mean, only the world can determine whether you do or don't. And so I'd come for that purpose. I'd come for that strong passion about the technology. And the third, it's something, you know what, it's something I actually took for granted till the last couple of years. It is a strong environment of inclusion. I have never in my world, I was interviewed not very long ago after many of the incidents of this past here about inclusion, and I said, you know, I gotta be honest with you, I've never felt that way. And you might find that hard to believe. Are there isolated incidences? I have 380,000 employees, of course, of my scale in the world. But I said, I have never felt anything. Any limit on myself, I put there. It was never put on me by IBM. And I said, I think that is such a deep root. It goes back to having hired the first disabled person in 1914. The first woman executive is 1943. I mean, I look now and I think, others, you've got to be kidding me. I've taken all this for granted, and I no longer take it for granted, right? And I'm proud of the culture. I didn't build it. I have only had to carry it on, right? And be sure it got even more, and I use the word inclusion, not diversity, on purpose. To me, inclusion is about sexual orientation, gender, religion, country, ethnicity, I don't care what it is, right? That you feel comfortable. This is why we have fought, you know, and I can't fight every battle. We have fought so hard for the Dreamers. We have fought so hard around these bathroom bills, these crazy things. But they were so symbolic about people feeling welcome in their workplace in those states. I happen to be a big employer in Texas and North Carolina too. So that was, and we got those stopped. But is it because of just that one thing? Because you can't fight everything. No, it was because that was very symbolic to me about inclusion. And so I feel that environment then, and it's what we do even now, you know, whether it's women, I am very proud, guys. We will have won this thing called the Catalyst Award. We're the only tech company and the only company on earth to have won it 4 times about inclusion in women in the workforce. So that would be my third reason. It would be passion, purpose, and inclusion. Yeah. Well, I finally said something that made sense. Okay.
Perhaps he's almost trite, but perhaps a fourth reason could be we've got a lot of crypto investors out here. We talk a little bit more about blockchain and what IBM is doing there. And maybe
we go right from inclusion to blockchain. Yeah. How's that? All right. This is an excellent segue here. How many? Okay. Who's a blockchain lover? Okay, I think a small group wants to meet later, not a big group. How about Bitcoin lover? Oh, subset. Okay. So can I just say, the reason those of you who didn't raise your hand, if I could encourage you to go look into blockchain, you think, why am I bringing this up as a technology? I honestly think the future on blockchain, I have a little saying. Blockchain will do for trusted transactions what the internet did for information. And I believe this very, very strongly. Its ability to trade transactions between people who don't necessarily know each other, not necessarily trust each other, in a way to remove friction on the movement of about anything, I think is quite high. And what makes it so possible to really get some traction is you don't have to rip out the guts and rewrite everything if you're a company to be able to use it. So the movement to it is not that difficult. And so you had Doug McMillan here from Walmart. So Doug and I started a project on food safety. You would be shocked at the number of people who die from food and how much food is wasted at food outbreaks. So how on earth could we get every competitor of his and every food company in the world to join on to this? They're competitors. And they're going to share all the information about what kind of food, avocado, spinach. You were right, but the spinach breakout, what happened, all that spinach wasted. And it typically, we've done the tests on many things now, but mangoes, 7 days to trace where a mango came from. We do it in 2 seconds now. So this idea of solving that problem, we're doing a big joint venture with the largest shipping company in the world, Maersk. The paperwork that accompanies a big cargo container exceeds the value of the contents of the cargo often. So there is so much opportunity. Now, I said all that. It is not about Bitcoin. There's something under it called blockchain. And it does matter how you implement it. And you have to have it be permissioned. Some of what's out there is opaque. I don't believe those will be what'll take off. You can't have people that will, in fact, some of, I won't use their names, other companies that have stuff out there, it is a bit of an anarchist, and it will allow crime to go on quite freely. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about where permissioned means I know who's on the network. I can tell them that professor here can only see 3 things, you can see 5. I know who governs this thing. I mean, who do you think governs the internet, right? There is a governing body. It's not 2 people. So there's a big open, we're big fans of open source. There's a big, it's the fastest growing open source, Hyperledger is the name of it, community there's been in time out in the Linux Foundation. And so it's governed by 200 companies now. That's a good thing. You have to have it be immutable. Anyways, I won't give you a lecture on blockchain, but I'm so optimistic about the things that it can do on the positive, like food safety, and the inefficiencies it can take out to go to better things on the other side. It's the fundamental technology, not a comment about cryptocurrencies. That's got a different, but I guarantee you, whatever you do, without having governments have an ability to see some of the money transfers, you're not going to be able to take off. So, you going to go into that now?
No, I'll stay clear of that.
Okay.
One last question before we turn to audience Q&A. I've been struck by the number of times you've mentioned the healthcare industry and cancer in particular, and I know you're on the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering. Is there a reason why this is such why this is a mission that's very personal to you, or is it just that you see this as the area of the biggest improvement?
To me, it is the biggest use of our GDP, and it's the biggest inefficiency with the lowest return. And it's true in a developed country like ours, guys, but I've spent so much time in Africa, India, China. These are unsolvable problems in these places. These people never, ever have a chance to get health care of the quality you and I experience. If any of us have cancer, we will be seen by a cancer center. The odds of that happening outside this country are like 0. I mean, outside a developed country. And so that does not have to be that way. And this is to me, I guess I did call it a moonshot, right? And a lot to be learned from that. But I think all of us in our companies get a chance to work on some of those, right? So it was healthcare. But go back on the other side, I'm a biggest fan of trying to help reg tech and really basic things as well, right? Improve on the other side. But to me, us in what we've done and started in healthcare is it was very symbolic and important. And I think it's a really hard journey. But it is a deadly disease with many variants, and it's impossible. We started with cancer. So we started in the hardest spot. It's an impossible to do without the assistance of these kind of technologies.
Thank you so much, Ginni. And before you have time to ask me any more questions, I think we can turn over to the audience for some Q&A.
Maybe you'd like to ask him a question.
No one can ask me questions. Turning the mic off.
Okay. Anyone?
Hi there. My name's Catherine. I'm an MBA too. My question's related to your time chairing the World Economic Forum. I think the World Economic Forum is one of the coolest ways that private and public leaders can work together to solve problems in a tops-down way. But as the world becomes increasingly decentralized, how should the World Economic Forum change and adapt to better address these problems?
It is a good tops-down, but I think what happens when you leave the World Economic Forum, it becomes a bottoms-up effort of what people can do. And I will tell you, this year, a majority of it, a lot of it was on skills issues and how everybody can work in partnership with that. So I think what it can do, don't try to put more into it than it's capable of, right? So it isn't as if it's a standing body. It is a standing body, but an organization that can actually have rules or committees, standards, and it's more about I think putting standards out there that can be followed in the rest of the world. This is a really critical time. As different countries move more inward with each other, it's a dangerous moment. Right now, Europe is setting many, many standards around data. Honestly, America should be in there because they're going to end up setting the de facto standards here. So you probably don't, the regulations like GDPR, global data protection, it's going to end up being a global standard, right? And we're not at the table as much as we should be. I know every time I'm in Europe and in Brussels, they're dying for companies to come fill a void that maybe is seen as a void by governments right now. And so I think what can happen when you said what happens next, I do think companies can help in this time, particularly where you might want to call it more and more countries look out for themselves, are more nationalistic, whatever words you would like to put around it. I think it calls for those of us going back, particularly around things like, modernization of trade, skills in the world, and we didn't talk much about cybersecurity, right? In cyber and that impact, because cyber is the one thing that will stop it'll take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back, right? With cyber here, with what happens. So I think that's what we can all go back and do. I always remember a meeting years ago that I'd had with Shimon Peres late in his life. And I remember a quote he had said to me. I don't know why it's always stuck with me, but maybe it's because I feel it's true. He said, companies can do more to help countries than governments because they know no boundary. And it's true. If you, those of you that were, you don't. I don't really see boundaries that way. And so I think it's that's the important follow-on, is what this public-private partnership becomes.
Thank you very much for your time. My name is Yaya. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm a joint degree candidate here doing MBA and Master's in Electrical Engineering. So my question to you was, how can AI help businesses that are outside the US or Europe, where the infrastructure that allows AI to let these businesses flourish, like intelligent investors or talent, like data scientists or something, are not available in these countries or locations?
Yeah, I think, first off, many of what we offer is a platform that is available in any country. It may not run in the country, but it's running somewhere else as a platform. And I was telling John ahead of time about one of your colleagues here, Joshua Browder, who is one of your colleagues. I mean, I met him only because why would I ever meet him, other than he found Watson, and he then built a business called Do Not Pay for people who shouldn't pay parking tickets that they got wrongly. And I think he's handled like 200,000 parking tickets, those of you that know the story, $11 million, but he's working on Syrian refugees now and how to get them the right paperwork to stay in different countries. And so I think this is more accessible. When we do work in Saudi Arabia as well, this is more accessible than you think. And so to me, I think this is a wonderful technology to allow entrepreneurs, as well as big, as well as them coming together. I actually see a lot for the coming together between those two constituents. And if you think of it as a platform, it's more accessible than not accessible, albeit some issues in certain countries, but still accessible. The back?
Hi, I'm Cheng Hao from the MSX program. IBM is a company, a global giant with a storied history. I'm wondering how you keep the IBM family nimble, creative, and innovative. Is it more of a top-down or bottom-up approach, or just like to hear your views?
What's your perception?
I think it has to be
It's
both.
okay.
Yeah, I think it has to be both. Myself, I'm from the Air Force. It's a big organization. Anytime you want to get something going, you want to start small. You want to create space for people, but at the same time, you need some top-down direction to say this is the vision. I'm just wondering if you have a slightly different take on it.
I do. I mean, not that this has been one of my biggest learnings, perhaps one of my biggest mistakes as well. So, Jordy asked me this. So IBM is today an $80 billion company in 170 countries. We talked about 46% of it new. Lots of new entrants, obviously, into this technology field. And so how do you get change to happen fast? So I'll tell you I'll try to make a very quick story about what my learning was. So probably my first 2 years as CEO, I would say to the group, look, it's true, the world is moving so fast. Come on, faster, faster, faster. You got to work. I mean, I think if anyone would have said, what does she talk about? They would have just said, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. And constantly. And I thought about after 2 years, what did I do? I exhausted them. That's about what I got done. Until it dawned on me that I have to change. It's my job, and we got to change how work is done. And I'll tell you, and so while much will ever be written about the portfolio and how it's changed, I think far more, one day, revisionist history, one day when we're distanced enough, we will look back, and the far more interesting story will be how work gets done and what happened to the people and to their skills. And on the how, what we had to learn was we were a B2B company. So the shortcut of this is, it meant you can be big and be fast, but you do have to re-architect work. And that means a lot of things, like even in B2B, hey, they expect everything to be as simple as the consumer world we all live in every day. That means design thinking. That means we hired 10,000 of the best designers from around the world, brought back that culture that had once existed, by the way, in IBM. Everything is done with empathy from the end user in, not from an engineering culture out, which is what a lot of tech companies are engineering out. And so it started with that. Then it started with really agile. Easy buzzword, really hard to change the way you do work unless you truly embrace it. So we probably now 200,000 agile experts, trained, black belts. It means small, multidisciplinary, co-located, minimum viable products. And think about minimum viable products. I mean, when you think of big things we do like run airlines, banks, you think of these big complex things. Going fast doesn't mean like make that big ugly thing faster. It means no, but it means start with something little, get it right, make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger. That's way different on the way you build things. So we had to change what agile, put that in, what did it mean? Then we had to co-locate. Talk to me about $1 billion later in real estate, renovations and all that kind of thing around the world. And so it's been, we had to change the performance management system. We had to move to net promoter score. I mean, sorry, there's like heavy work underneath real transformations. And that's what had to do to happen to make you work fast. So is that top and that's bottom and top? It's both. But I tell you, until we as leaders help people change how they could do their work, that wasn't going to happen. And so that to me, and then the people on skills, the skills part, for anybody changing a company, actually I'm going to talk about this again tomorrow, a thing I have to do. We are all going to have to change the skills of everybody in our company. I mean, I lectured for the first Friday of every month for 4 years. I taught a class for 4 years, a MOOC. And it was about what the future was, what it would be, had clients on over and over and over. So you paint the picture of the world that you are building. Then you have to say to people, okay, now I need to make it so you can change your skills. And then I'm going to pay you for changing them, meaning I'm going to put compensation for those that then go ahead and change skills. And then the third thing you have to do after you've done that kind of reinforcement of it, then you've got to say, okay, now I'm going to make this transparent. It's going to be obvious. We're going to post who's got that skill, who doesn't have that skill. And that's the world of transparency we live in. Stale, hot. And you'd be surprised. People will move. There's nothing to do with age. This has nothing to do with age. And that's why it's changed the way I even think about hiring. We were talking about what school, is it better to hire an MBA or there's room for everybody. I think the most distinguishing characteristic is your curiosity. If you are a lifelong learner, I would like you. Because that's what's in front of us. And it doesn't matter to me what school you came out of, because that's got to do with passion. It's this lifelong learning. So the thing about the skills and the people and then changing how work gets done, to me that will one day be the real sets of learning that comes out of how do companies reinvent themselves in this day and age.
This will be the last question.
Is it a good one?
A lot of pressure.
Or we'll be the second to last.
I'll try. So thanks so much for coming in. My name's Stephanie Young. I'm an MBA 3. We exist.
Is that a good thing?
Depends on the MBA 3.
Okay.
I'm doing a joint program. And my question for you was, you talked about companies potentially crossing borders that governments couldn't cross. And I was curious for you personally with IBM, how you see IBM's role in government in the US and globally, and conversely flip that and think about what you think government needs to be doing to make it effective, to make them effective working with companies like IBM.
Yeah. Look, this is a good question, because you can imagine even earlier in the year I got asked this question many, many times. And with my whole workforce, actually, to explain and re-explain to them what is our role. And I feel every IBM CEO has worked with every United States president, as an example, since Woodrow Wilson. And as I say to my workforce and my teams, I say, guys, this is not about politics, it is about policies. In fact, we are the only tech I know of that makes no political contributions, zero. We've always had a position about it, 0, 0, 0, everywhere, 0. By the way, when your answer is like no, it's easy to be consistent, no. And so, like, if you don't start. And so, but it does give you a freedom to then, you then debate policies. And so it's policies, not politics. And so that is what I have firmly stuck on, is to what my issues. I don't care, in every country we have to deal with, because mind you, whether it was, I was with Premier Modi last week. This week I'll do Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada, or whether it is, Xi Jinping. It doesn't matter. Each country, I've never met a country that didn't want you to increase your workforce there. Never. Labor is the currency. Jobs is currency. I don't care who you are, that is true, for as long as I can remember. So I think what we can do is each of us, so you adopt the things that are important to you, right? So what's important to us is education in every country that we work on. What's important to us is inclusion and diversity and this ability, and why? You want it for innovation. I mean, it's not just for an altruistic reason. You want it for innovation. So we're very strong supporters of open innovation, very strong supporters of education, and very strong supporter of free trade. I mean, I worked really hard on things like TPP because I think they're not only good for business, they were good for those countries too. It held them to a level and a standard not to steal IP, to let data flow freely, to have wages be a certain way. I mean, there were lots of good things, and they were modernized for the digital era, by the way, which most trade agreements are not modernized for. So those are some of the main issues we have really devoted ourselves to. And of course, in the US, we wanted a competitive tax system, right? And so, because otherwise, it allows other countries to buy companies here in all for those kinds of reasons, not for the right reasons. So that's, to me, what we should do. And in return, what do you want government to do? Well, you want them not to heavily regulate. I've never met a place that regulation was a really great thing. But you do want them to create, in every country, a level playing field. So that's what I want out of most governments. And of course, the treatment of people and the focus on education, but that level playing field. And that's what we work on in almost every country, which is about how to be sure there's a level playing field, that people can move freely, ideas can move freely, right? I love that old saying, just as true, like good ideas have no passport, right? And so that is what you want to be able to have happen. And I'm sure it's why we fought so hard around immigration too, right? So that regardless of country, that there should be good, and have done a lot of work on the immigration as well. So that would be my takeaway, would be it's always about policies, not politics. And if you focus on that, my view is you can change the world. You can change the world.
Well, Ginni, as an international student struggling to get a job, I hugely appreciate that. And also want to say, believe me, you answered my questions a lot better than I could have done. So thank you very, very much for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Ginni Rometty.
You're a good sport.